All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Got the mics on? Ladies and gentlemen, let me get started. Good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to Stanford Law School's first ever Veterans Law Conference and the first conference of its kind on veterans treatment courts. My name is John Hamilton. I'm a JD MBA candidate here at Stanford and an Air Force veteran. I'm incredibly excited for this event. Thank you. I'm incredibly excited for this event. It's something that we've put a lot of work into over the last year. You may not believe it, but it's something we've actually been working on for about a year now. And it promises to be an engaging and meaningful couple of days. And I thank you all for going out of your way to come here. I'll introduce Dean McGill at Stanford Law School in just a moment. But first I want to take care of some administrative housekeeping items. First I want to make sure that everyone is checked in. When you check in, you'll get a name tag. You'll also get a folder that has the schedule for today and tomorrow, and then also biographies of all of our panelists. Several organizations have also provided additional handouts. We are approaching this conference as almost a platform for other people who are active and interested in this to publicize their events and causes as well. So feel free to look at those and grab those as you wish. This entire event is being video recorded. You can see the video camera in the back. Related to that, we're going to have several Q&A sessions throughout today and tomorrow. So make sure that when you ask a question, you come up to the microphone to ask your question. If you're not mobile and we need to bring the mic to you, that's fine, but just something we ask for as well. Videos will be uploaded to the Stanford Law School YouTube channel in about a week. Additionally, we encourage everyone to take pictures and post on social media. On page 3 of your packets, we have some suggested hashtags that you can use. We've also written them up on the whiteboards here. This conference is made possible and is free and open to the public thanks to an amazing set of sponsors who were incredibly generous. Included among those are the Stanford Law and Policy Lab, the law firm Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe, the Stanford University Graduate Student Council, and the Stanford Public Interest Law Foundation, and we're very thankful for their support. We've also partnered with the Stanford Journal of Criminal Law and Policy, which is dedicating its fall 2016 issue to publishing research papers related to veterans in the justice system, and they'll also publish research that's coming out of this conference. Okay. It's now my honor and privilege to introduce Professor Elizabeth McGill, Dean of Stanford Law School. In the spirit of this event, Dean McGill is an academic Green Beret. She's an expert in administrative and constitutional law, widely published, a member of the American Law Institute, and was recently elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She's worked on Capitol Hill and clerked on the U.S. Supreme Court. She is additionally an important moral leader for this institution and a tireless supporter of Stanford Law School's veterans community. In particular, while I have the floor, I want to thank you for your support of the veteran student community here, in particular your generous support of the Yellow Ribbon program. It means a lot to all of us. Dean McGill, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I often have a line that I stole from someone else, that the introduction that was just given is one that my mother would believe, which I heard someone say once, but my mother would never believe that I'm an academic Green Beret. So I have to, even my mother would not, she'd like it, but she wouldn't believe it. So thank you for saying that, John. I'm so happy you're all here. I am going to speak for about 35 seconds, just to say, because I know you want to get to the substance of what you're going to talk about. This is exactly the kind of conference we love to have at Stanford Law School. It's something the aspects of this conference that I'm going to talk about for just a moment are, I think, sort of distinctive for Stanford and the commitment we have. So veterans treatment courts are an interesting, experimental, innovative development that deserve very close study, which is partly what this conference is obviously about. And the people involved in this conference and have been involved in leading up to this conference include academics, judges, practitioners, advocates, and students. So the set of perspectives that you're going to hear today and the work that went into this conference, including by a group of Policy Lab students supervised by Lucy Herman. Where are you, Lucy? She's left the room. Where are you? Thank you, Lucy. So we've had kind of folks with different perspectives and different backgrounds and different forms of expertise come to this very interesting and important question. And that's exactly the kind of conference we love to facilitate and love to be a host of. So I'm so glad you're here. I know it's going to be a productive exchange. I do want to say that I am incredibly proud to have received compliments from John of the institution's support of the veterans community at Stanford. It's one of the most, the community at Stanford is, you are leaders to a one in the institution, and I've talked to our alumni from previous generations, and one of the things I want to tell all of them is we have a very strong, large, engaged veterans community, and many of them, that was not their experience when they were at Stanford Law School, so it's a really something the institution is very, very proud of. So to hear compliments on our support is really meaningful personally to me and to Faye Deal, the admissions director, so thank you. So thank you all for being here. I know it's going to be productive and interesting because of the many different perspectives, and I will let you get to the substance.
Great, thank you, Dean McGill. Our first panel is a presentation of research from the Stanford Law and Policy Program on Veterans Treatment Courts. The panel will be moderated by Professor Robert Weisberg, a seminal scholar in the field of criminal justice and the faculty co-director of the Stanford Criminal Justice Center. Professor Weisberg will be joined by 3 current Stanford Law School students. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Although I will speak first, I am by a large distance the least important person on this panel and in this project. I've been teaching criminal law here for many, many years, and I am one of the beneficiaries of the gift that the law school has received from the presence of veterans in the classes over the last 5 or 6 years. In fact, this is the second chance I've had to be involved in an academic project associated with veterans in criminal justice. In 2011-2012, we had a course about, more broadly, veterans in the criminal justice system that at least initially addressed some of the questions about veterans treatment courts, but was designed really to just begin to lay out the basic terrain of the involvement of vets in the criminal justice system. It is so difficult to get into Stanford Law School, I couldn't get in here again if I applied, that of course all our students are unbelievably academically talented, but obviously our veterans bring a level of wisdom and experience and maturity which we're all the beneficiaries of. We have a type of course here called, under different names, a policy practicum or a policy lab. The idea basically is that we have clients, not clients in the sense of an individual being represented in litigation. Rather, the client is some kind of public agency, sometimes a nonprofit, usually some kind of government agency, which is carries out some kind of social policy, usually some kind of social welfare policy. And because of the state of government funding, of course, those agencies often are deeply lacking in the research they need to understand the best way to face the challenges of their work, the best way to design their work, and to carry out their work. So the policy labs are basically research seminars where groups of students working with a faculty member engage in intensive research, which can be of all kinds: archival research, documentary research, empirical research, and live interview or survey research, to improve the knowledge base that the client agency can use. In effect, we're a pro bono consulting firm, if you will, or a set of pro bono consulting firms. This particular policy lab arose in part because a very remarkable congressman from Massachusetts, Representative Seth Moulton, himself a vet, was very interested in enhancing the emergence, the still very early emergence, of veterans treatment courts in his home state in Massachusetts at the state level. Long story short, the networking was very complicated, but Representative Moulton got in touch with one of the graduates we are unbelievably proud of, Gabe Ledeen. Gabe, where are you? I knew he had to be here. Gabe Ledeen, who graduated from Stanford 3 years ago, is a veteran himself and has been one of the great inspirers of and actually implementers of programs for veterans here at the law school. In any event, a group of 6 students was formed to do a few things, which you'll hear about now. First, let me introduce the people involved. On my right is Vina Selam, and my immediate left are Ryan McElroy and Sean Rosenberg. The three other students involved were Jenny Oxley, Jacob Raver, and Robin Levin. Our co-instructor was, of course, Gabe Ledeen, but also playing a major role in it was my colleague Debbie Muckamal, who was here, I believe. There she is, who was the executive director of our Criminal Justice Center. So it was a multi-person team, but the students were really the heart of the work. The work basically involved trying to learn what the state of development is of this phenomenon called Veterans Treatment Courts. There are some extremely well-developed courts in the United States that you'll hear about over the course of the next day or two. Right here in San Jose, Judge Manley's courts, and wonderful courts in Ohio, where Justice Stratton from Ohio will be able to talk about them. But courts are incipient, merely at the conception stage or the imagined stage in many places in the country. And as they all develop at different rates, they need to garner wisdom from their predecessors in terms of exactly how to design such a court. And they have to face all kinds of challenges. What is their statutory authority for having a court in the first place? What are the eligibility criteria to determine which veterans can be in the system based on which crimes they may be accused of, their prior crime status, and so on and so on. There are many other challenges. Who need to be the stakeholders in a veterans treatment court? Is it just the judge and the prosecutor? Is it the defense? Is it probation, and so on? What are the processes for identifying the participants in the court who may not even know they're eligible for diversion treatment? What lessons can be learned from the more established diversion courts, most obviously the older, I guess one can now say somewhat venerable courts, known as mental health courts and drug courts in the United States? So our goal was to assess the state of the knowledge and actually the state of the unknown, as it were, to help set up a kind of concept model so that jurisdictions that are in the process or are thinking of getting into the process of starting veterans treatment courts can think through some of the design and implementation problems they're going to face, assess what the costs and benefits are, see what they can learn in terms of best practices, and figure out what they need to know about their own operations as they go forward to evaluate themselves. So we have produced a draft which will be available to you of the current state of our research, and there's an executive summary, but I now like our students to start highlighting some of the major insights of the research, and we're going to start with Sean, who will tell us something about what the subject of VTCs has been and why we're studying them.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Sean Rosenberg. Thank you all for coming. I'll give you a little bit of background on VTCs, where they came from, what they are. So the first Veterans Treatment Court was founded in 2008 in Buffalo by Judge Russell. Right off the bat, for people that aren't familiar with them, the term court is in some ways a misnomer. It takes place in a court. It's a diversionary program, so it's more of a treatment program than the really adversarial thing that people tend to think of when they think of courts. They were founded because veterans are very kind of overrepresented in incarceration in America, and there are a couple different theories for why this might be. One of them is veterans have a high rate of traumatic brain injuries, post-traumatic stress disorder, other behavioral issues, and that comes from a couple different factors that feed into it. One of them being with a volunteer military now, as opposed to in the past where people were drafted. You have a smaller force where people are repeatedly going on deployments and they're spending a lot more time in war zones, and that can have detrimental effects sometimes. The state of war, the way people fight now in asymmetrical warfare like we fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, Vietnam, it's not like, I guess, in the old days where there was a front line, and if you weren't there, you kind of knew you were a little bit safer. People spend their entire time deployed in a state of peril. With the advent of better body armor and things like that, people are surviving injuries that they might not have survived before, which is obviously a great thing. But because of that, you have people that have brain injuries and head injuries that they're now fortunately living through, but there are oftentimes repercussions because of that. And so in an effort to combat this, veterans treatment courts were started, and they were modeled off drug and mental health courts, which are more established diversionary courts. And the two big differentiating factors between those two are, first, there's a pretty extensive relationship with the VA in some courts. That's something that's obviously different from other types as far as treatment, which will be discussed in more depth a little bit later. And also there's a mentor presence in these courts. And the idea is, people in the military are used to working with battle buddies or whatever term you'll use. And as people go through this treatment program, it's seen as very beneficial to have someone that can kind of work with them and guide them and relate to them. It's typically another veteran, someone that they can kind of talk to and help them along the way. So there are a few hundred of these courts in America. It's still a pretty new program, obviously, but it's a program that continues to grow, and it's not a completely uniform program in design, eligibility, or anything else like that, but that's kind of the state of where it's at right now.
Thank you, Sean. As I mentioned, the challenge of any new VTC is to design itself, and one of the crucial threshold questions is who gets into the VTC, what the eligibility criteria are. And I'm going to ask Vina to address that, and if you could also just say a few words about how this group actually got the knowledge it has now in terms of the sources of information that will enable you to describe how the choices can be made.
Sure. So I'll start with that last point. We did some qualitative interviews with Judge Manley and people in the local Veterans Treatment Court here in San Jose, and we also reached out to stakeholders in all of the 5 Veterans Treatment Courts that are starting in Massachusetts. So they're all relatively new. They've all started in the past 2 years, so they're very much in the thick of trying to figure out what the appropriate design choices are for their court. So it was really informative to speak with them about how they made those decisions and how they're working out, and if they're rethinking any of the decisions that they've made about how to design their courts. And in addition to that, we did a pretty comprehensive literature review with the help of our amazing librarians here at Stanford, and just basically covered all of the literature that exists so far about veterans treatment courts in particular, and also lots of literature about drug treatment courts and mental health treatment courts, because there are a lot of similarities in those models. And to Professor Weisberg's first question, one of the criteria that's really important when we're deciding how we want to design the court is deciding who to include. So what are the eligibility criteria of the veterans that we're going to be accepting into the courts? And one of the eligibility criteria is based on the type of crime that was committed. So we've seen variation all across the spectrum in this regard. So some courts actually are limited to only accepting veterans who have committed pretty minor crimes, like misdemeanors. It seems like that's a safer bet in many ways, and we can kind of try out this treatment model with them, knowing that they probably won't leave and do anything that bad. On the other hand, courts like the one here in San Jose with Judge Manley will actually accept all different types of crimes, including serious felonies and violent crimes. So Judge Manley related to us that they've even accepted a veteran who was charged with attempted murder, which is kind of in the high-end range of what any court that we've looked into would actually accept. And for people who do decide to accept veterans who have committed violent crimes, I think a lot of the rationale behind that is that they have substance abuse disorders or mental health disorders that have caused them to do these violent crimes, and those things are often linked directly to their experience in combat or any post-traumatic stress disorder or anything that they're experiencing. So it seems when you're designing a court specifically for veterans that you would actually want to address the problem that what led them to commit the violent crimes and try to help them recover from that. Another eligibility requirement is the discharge status of the veteran, and that kind of ties into what Ryan will talk about later with the relationship between the VTCs and the VAs, because VA services are only available to certain veterans who have been released on a certain discharge status. And so that complicates things a little bit when the courts might want to accept certain veterans but might not be able to provide the treatment services that they need if they're unable to link up with the VA for that. And there are also, just a broad overview, some courts require a nexus between the crime that was committed and a certain incident in their military background that may have triggered something that led to that crime. And some courts also specifically require that there's a substance abuse or a mental health diagnosis, whereas others are a little more just willing to evaluate on a case-by-case basis of whether or not there's a need that can be addressed in a treatment court as opposed to a regular court.
Thank you, Vina. I'm going to just quickly run through a few other miscellaneous of the design questions any court may face. Then I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to talk about the VA relationship. And then, of course, we really welcome a Q&A exchange. Before a court decides how to run its program, including the decision Vina described about eligibility, it first has to decide what constraints it's under. It would be a wonderful thing if jurisdictions, legislators funded, encouraged, required VTC courts, and that's going to happen, I think, to an increasing degree. But right now, in a funny way, the question is first, do they permit them? And what does that mean? First of all, obviously, it takes a great deal of a judge's time, and sometimes it's a full-time job for a judge, and that may be a decision made by a legislature or by the presiding judge of a court. Second of all, there's a question of what the court can do in terms of diversion, what it means to divert. So, for example, the choice between a so-called predisposition and post-disposition model. And we've seen great variation around the country. Massachusetts largely uses the post-disposition model simply because that seemed to be the most feasible way to start. What does that mean? You become eligible for the treatment services and the supervision in the treatment court after you've pleaded guilty. That means the treatment is essentially part of your sentence. Now, depending on the jurisdiction, it is possible that some kind of erasure of the conviction could happen later, but we all know erasure and expungement is a very complicated matter with lots of different consequences. But some favor that model, in part because it's, for one thing, it's going to narrow the number of people who are in the program, and that may just be economically necessary. Second of all, many judges, out of a sense of justice or because of their views of rehabilitation, believe that people will do much better in the program if they have confessed. And after all, a guilty plea is really a confession. So that's one alternative possibility. In other jurisdictions, as in San Jose, we see the predisposition model, which is essentially a deferred prosecution model. That's a fancy buzz term from criminal justice generally. It's a kind of pre-charge probation, whereby if you are potentially charged with a crime and could ultimately have to face full adjudication, if you are deemed eligible and go through the processes of the program and succeed, if you graduate, and that's the term Judge Manley uses, then you will have avoided prosecution altogether and any charge will be erased. Needless to say, there are arguments in favor of that. You get people earlier, it's broader, and so on, and there may be more flexibility. Simply to say that there is no right way or wrong way, jurisdictions have to make a choice between those two, or both, of course. But they first have to find out whether they even have the authority to do the predisposition, which is a significant change from normal criminal adjudication. Any number of other issues we could talk about. Obviously, processes of identification. We don't know who's out there, who's eligible. Veterans who are caught in the criminal justice system don't know that they're eligible. Police officers who arrest people don't know that they're veterans. All kinds of communication gaps, which frankly plague all of criminal justice, but are especially relevant in this particular context. Two other things I'll quickly mention. First, the term stakeholders is used a lot, but let's go out and be quite practical about it. It's who's on the team that's working. The ideal is, of course, to have not just the prosecutor, but also probation, social service agencies, which will be providing treatment, to be right there literally in the courtroom to help set up the program with the judge and report on success. veterans outreach coordinators who are crucial links with the VA, and the defense lawyers themselves, because we are talking about criminal defendants facing serious charges sometimes. One of the interesting and heartwarming things is that all the cliches about the adversarial system, I won't say they go away completely, but they're significantly mitigated when you see the harmony among these team members in these courts. Last thing I want to mention is we usually purport to measure the success of programs like this in terms of reduction in recidivism. And you'll hear Justice Stratton, for example, was talking earlier to us about the remarkably low recidivism rates coming out of her great courts in Ohio. This is an important measure, but I think a bit of caution is necessary. The term recidivism is tossed around rather loosely. It can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. What does it mean to recidivate? Does it mean to be arrested for a felony? Does it mean to be arrested for a misdemeanor? Does it mean to be convicted? What if you're simply revoked on supervision? There are many ways of defining the criteria and therefore many ways of measuring them. I say that because ultimately VTC courts, like all courts, will have to be evaluated and evaluate themselves. So they have to come up with a meaningful and transparent definition of recidivism. And most important, whatever definition or measure you use, if we, as we cannot avoid, start comparing VTCs around the country or within a state to see comparative success, for gosh sake, at least be using the same definition. So that's an important program design or measurement design. I'll turn it over to Ryan to talk about the VA.
Good afternoon. One of the last aspects of our research was focused to the treatment and mentorship side of the VTCs. I'm going to briefly discuss some of the issues and observations as well as the players involved, whether you're talking VA-based or community-based services. As you can probably guess, a lot of the local will at the county level to have a VTC is based on the fact the the VA foots the bill. As it should. So the VA is taking care of the treatment of the members within. Where this comes to play is the fact that some VTCs actually limit eligibility beyond what Vina was talking about to require that the member be specifically VA eligible. Fortunately, the majority of courts allow for both VA eligible and VA ineligible members to partake, but it's just one of those factors where you see the money coming into play. Regarding the VTCs, regardless of their eligibility requirements, the VA mandates that each VTC have a VJO, a Veteran Justice Officer, and this is really kind of the cornerstone of that court beyond the judge. The VJO is meant to do the outreach, assessment, and overall case management of the court, and often these VJOs are coming from the veteran community themselves. They were veterans at one point, and often they're veterans that have experience with criminal justice, whether while they're in the military under the UCMJ or in the public sector as well. And overall, these VJOs, you can kind of think of as like a big brother, big sister as well, providing a lot of encouragement, mentorship to the members, and really pushing them through a successful program. Notably, though, these VJOs, they can work with both VA eligible and non-VA eligible members, which is beneficial for the court overall. In addition to the VJOs, VTCs usually have court staff who are tying members to services, whether it's the VA, but more importantly, like the community-based services. Especially if the member is VA ineligible, they're really only going to get services at a state, county, a local level. Regarding mentorship, both Sean and Professor Weisberg mentioned that these courts are not your traditional adversarial system, and what also sets them apart from your standard diversionary court is that the fact that mentorship is built into it, and these courts really rely on mentorship to get the veteran through the program. So in addition to the VJOs, there's often what they call a vet mentor, as well as participation from vet centers. A veteran mentor is usually provided from a VA grant, a VA fund source. What this person is doing is really at a local level, tying the vet to neighborhood services and kind of being there as well as like a big brother, big sister role. In some cases, you'll have VJOs actually do the vet mentor role as well, but the VA advises against that, just not extending their bandwidth too far. Regarding the vet centers, these are kind of your local organizations. I don't know if everyone's ever been to one. They're usually very open, fraternal place where people can go get counseling, therapy, as well as just connect with other veterans in their community. Importantly, these can also provide services to VA ineligible members as well. bottom line, a lot of these services they're providing are pretty fluid, and they're going to be personality dependent. You might have a vet mentor, you might have VJO, you might have someone from the vet center that's very passionate about the position, is very well connected, and wants to take a really hands-on approach, and really can do so much more than what you might see at a different VTC. In fact, you might have a VTC where the veteran mentor is kind of that cornerstone of the court, communicating between the member, the judge, the DA, as well as defense. Now, overall, some of the issues we identified regarding the treatment and mentorship could be categorized as the type of treatment, the timing of treatment, and the consistency of treatment. I say type of treatment. When you think of advanced care, such as like PTSD or traumatic brain injuries, TBI, the VA is generally pretty good. Most VA staff will tell you, for example, the Palo Alto VA is the crown jewel of the system. You think of like PTSD and TBI, that's where a lot of the funding and research and focus is on. So they're great at providing services for those members. Where you might see a gap is the standard stuff such as mental health care, as well as substance abuse, where you might have community-based services that are actually better at doing those types of things. Regarding timing, there's really going to be a problem across the board. And it's not just for your standard medical services, more so for what I would call like your high-demand, low-density services, such as residential treatment, as well as housing, which is an issue for most of these veterans in the court who are often homeless. And an issue comes with this when you're talking about prioritization. And the members within the VTC aren't necessarily prioritized on these lists. A counter to why that is that the alternative would be a system where you have members being prioritized above other veterans who happen to not be justice involved. In some way, you might create more of a remedial versus a preventative system. And overall, the VA is really agnostic to how it works. They just want to provide services to the VA eligible member, whether they are involved in a VTC or a veteran like me at the law school. And lastly, the consistency of treatment. Not just medical treatment, but the VJA program itself and the role of mentorship. Overall, there's a lack of program-wide studies. In fact, there's no national level evaluation of treatment throughout the VTCs and outcomes or the VJO program generally. And we're going to see this come into play as kind of a disparity. If you rely on evidence-based practices, you're going to see disparity across particular VTCs as well as the VAs, as well as the VJO program. Yeah.
Thank you. Before we turn it over to questions, I just want to say something about the role of leadership or lack thereof in VTCs. The great VTCs that we've seen already are usually the result of very particular individuals, very often judges, though obviously working with others, who just commit themselves to the work. And it produces heroic stories, but it's not a sufficient basis for a nationwide program. I think if just Judge Manley in San Jose actually charged by the hour, and if somebody imputed his fee based on the quality of his work, it would probably break the budget of Santa Clara County. The fact is he does it out of love for justice and the health of veterans. But ultimately, we're going to have something much more systematic, and the programs, of course, will generally be run on a local basis because that is where most criminal justice is. But obviously, this is a unique form of criminal justice in its unavoidable tie to the federal programs and the Veterans Administration. But ultimately, one always looks to the federal government to provide the larger revenue base and the larger leadership on this. Just to say that we've seen for the last few years rather fitful efforts or gestures of commitment by the federal government to do this thing called criminal justice reform or to address mass incarceration. And it's had limited success so far, and the bipartisan consensus has not always been as strong as people had predicted. You would think this issue would really be broad-based and very, very nonpartisan, so that we could actually, a few years down the road, have rigorous review of programs, and new programs would really learn what the best practices are before they start. So thanks, and I invite questions to be directed to my colleagues here. I think we're told to bring people to microphone, if you don't mind.
I'm sure everybody can hear me.
But it has to get recorded, we're told.
Ellen going to car.
You have so many people to thank, I know. Yeah, okay.
I hope I don't know anybody here. Is anybody from the VA here? Oh, turn around. My name's Catherine, and I am from Palo Alto, VA. I am from Polytrauma, and I am a Polytrauma TBI nurse case manager. I would be where the rubber meets the road with regard to what you all are doing. I didn't get this until a few days ago, last week. Irony, one of my patients for the very first time went through VCT on Monday. So I just wanted to share a little story with you so that you know that it's evolving, because I don't think, reason why I'm here today is I don't think I represented him very well in terms of a VA employee, because I knew nothing about this. My patient has a severe brain injury in terms of memory. He has no recollection of even being in the military. They picked him up in regular court. I guess the VGO was actually in the courtroom, did a background check and said, "Sir, you're in the military." And he's like, "I don't remember being in the military." And they did a whole check. Actually, they found his DD-214. They registered him within 2 months. And you know how long it takes to get service connection. We got him 70% service connected. A whole lot of, I'll just move forward. So part of the reason why I'm here today is to learn a little bit more about the program. Also tell you that it's working, at least in the Valley. I won't tell you which county, but it's working there in some senses. What's missing is, at least from the 1 week that I've been involved in this, is, and you already alluded to it, is a little bit more transparency, coordination. I don't know, no one knows about it. I'm actually going to take this back to Polytrauma and bring all this stuff to them, but I know everybody's spread really thin. But if we're going to be the de facto treatment of choice or work within the communities under maybe Veterans Choice, however we can get all that to go, we need more inroads to the VA, even if it's just like this. Because most people, actually I had to jump through some hoops just to get here, because it was like, what? You want to go where to do what? What is that? So keep up the good work, and it's actually working in some senses.
Please come down.
I am a veteran, and I perhaps was in your county, Santa Clara County, not with Judge Manley, but with another judge. And their diversionary court did not exist when Judge Manley, but I still felt, because the judge was a former naval captain, he gave me a little bit of compassion. Instead of going to federal state prison, 3 years of mental health probation. So that really, during that 3 years of mental health probation, I started digging deeper, knowing, why am I drinking? Why am I got DUI? PTSD, what is that? So being directed to that. But same time, I do not work for the VA hospital, and I am service connected 100%. And I think what's happening now is that everyone is turning to VTC. Veterans, as the gentleman Ryan was mentioning, there is this veterans who commit crimes now get first priority. And I have been trying to get into PTSD treatment for almost years. There's a waiting list. And so this is where we're competing for limited resources when the VA system inside, and we get turned away because the Department of Justice is giving grants to the VA to go bring this person from jail, bring them into the VA. So we that are 100% are bumped for some of these individuals. So we really have some conflict there. I have conflict with the staff. And so I always file federal complaints, EEO complaints with the VA. So now, we've been given the choice program. It's being outsourced to the VA. They too don't recognize VTC courts. So the VA is actually now outsourcing us to other states. They don't have VTC courts. So there's really, I'm sitting with some of the VA people, and I kind of like nodding my head, I can't believe they're here. But we veterans, we just kind of feel like presenting propaganda. You know, I kind of feel like I've been waiting for years. Now they're going to send me to Salt Lake City. So I kind of want to share the other side of the coin. What's really happening with VTCs? That Judge Manley, I think he's doing a wonderful job. It's a Superior Court judge who's going to be here from San Francisco. But some of us, some of these VA counselors, social workers, they're pressured to put this person first, fast track them versus us. And we have a higher rating, 100% rating. They don't even have a rating. So that's where I kind of feel that's a little bit injustice for us. So I just kind of hoping that, that somebody stimulate someone's mind here, some of your policymakers, say, should we who are now law-abiding, should we have to wait for them?
Thank you for the question.
Yes, sir.
Want to comment on that?
I think in general there's, a common sort of knock on the VA is they are very, they're very taxed. There's a lot of people that need services of all kinds, and this is a situation that's not, not particularly uncommon, and it's why there is often a VJO, because there's a fear that there's this relationship in a system that's already trying to provide services for a huge number of people, and then you have someone else that comes in through the court system, and if they were to do it on their own, there's the fear that it could be a bit of a hostile relationship with an already very taxed VA, and someone now comes in and it's like, hey, I'm in the justice system. Do I get priority? And that's why it's typically, like Ryan was saying, an agnostic system where they don't get preference, but it's also trying to recognize that, people make mistakes, but they're in this program because they need treatment, and you want to provide that treatment, but it is difficult. And the VA's taken steps to be more efficient and to, deal with their tremendous workload, but it's not. It's unfortunately not an overnight fix.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Garcia. I'm with the Solano Superior Court, and we have a relatively new Veterans Treatment Court and just graduated our first 3 graduates last Friday. And I'm new to the courts. I've only been with the courts for 6 months, and one of the reasons they brought me in was a struggle for funding. Many of our specialty courts, our collaborative courts, are grant funded, whether it's from the State Judicial Council, Department of Justice, SAMHSA. So my job is to try to get funding together. With our Veterans Treatment Court and our other specialty courts, the issue that I've discovered is about evaluation. I asked if we had any kind of electronic databases that we monitor our participants. We don't. I have 5 case managers who have different adult drug court, veterans treatment court, integrated domestic violence court. We have pretrial services, and we keep a lot of paper. So every time I have to report to a funding source and say, who did we help? Are we helping the right people? Are the people we're helping reflective of the community at large? Are they reflective of who is being arrested and charged? I can't answer those questions. And so when I talk about success with specialty courts, especially because I'm trying to build knowledge in my local community, I use national data. I don't have local data. So when we talk about research and evaluation, I think it's kind of hard to show our success or even our failures, because some veterans treatment courts, some drug courts don't help, they hurt. And I don't know if my court is one of those courts, and I want to know. And I think that's one of the reasons when I saw this, and it's about evaluation, I thought this was important that I come, because I'm looking for drug court case management databases, software, and if anyone here is on any kind of system, I'm really curious. I've budgeted money. Every grant application I submit, I put in money for technology. And I think that's important. The only way we could really have some really good research is if we have good data. And if we have terrible data, which we have, how are we going to improve? How are we going to justify our existence?
Run away right in?
Sure. So I am your counterpart in San Francisco. My name is Lisa Lightman, and I'm the director of our collaborative court programs there. And we have about 7 or 8 core programs, of which our Veterans Treatment Court started about 3 years ago. We have about 60 clients now. We probably graduated about 30. We do have an electronic database that we can probably share with you, but it's really tough. We get directives from the feds to do certain things. One is to evaluate. Our feeling is that we didn't want to evaluate right away. We really needed to have the court in operation and to have some time behind us. But there are some requirements from the feds. Also, I'm really challenged by getting funding. We did get an implementation grant from BJA, and that allows us to have treatment for those who are not VA eligible. So there's all kinds of balls in the air when we develop these programs. We welcome anyone here to come and visit us. We're really proud of the work that we do. And so come and speak with me. Okay.
Could I just say on that score, this is very small consolation, but the problem you're seeing in lack of data in VTC courts is basically the problem of criminal justice, and particularly in California. Here we sit in the heart of Silicon Valley. California's data collection for its criminal justice system is catastrophic. It's terrible. And it goes way beyond VTCs, but of course VTCs are part of the system. And on the one hand, the state does a lousy job. On the other hand, when things get delegated more and more to the counties, this has been especially true under AB 109 and realignment, the counties, which have worked heroically well under AB 109, face their own terrible problems in collecting data, and then even if they have data, and San Francisco was we all know San Francisco is anomalous in many ways, but it's anomalously good on that score. The lack of communication or summation of data across counties, especially because it's not as if the counties are silos. That is to say, defendant X is being dealt with in county Y, whatever, but that turns out that person is actually, guess what? There are fugitive warrants on him in another county. He's on probation in another county, and nobody's talking to each other. So it's kind of perverse consolation I'm giving you, but there it is.
Well, I did make contact with the California Judicial Council asking if there was some kind of statewide vendor-approved database shared, and the answer was that I guess there was some kind of incident years ago where contractors were paid $1 billion and nothing ever came from it, and now I shouldn't raise this issue about a statewide system publicly because I will be, tarred and feathered, because other states have statewide systems. So I thought, well, if these states over here can do it, why can't we? And I guess it's something people can't talk about now.
I'll just put in a pitch for something else along those lines, which is beyond VTCs and a little aside from it. A very good example of a state which is terrific in terms of data is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a thing called the Sentencing Commission. It's a great sentencing commission, and it isn't of the controversial sort whereby some group of, as we always say, unelected bureaucrats determine what the sentence should be for various crimes. It's basically a state-authorized data shop whereby it provides data to all the local agencies, and the local agencies are obligated to give this entity data and to receive it back in summarized form. State sentencing commissions are terrific entities in many, many states. For all kinds of reasons that we have been studying with great frustration the last 10 years here, California doesn't want one. And if you leave it to the normal agencies of government, state, federal, executive branch, judicial, and all that, nobody is taking a holistic picture of the problem. Other questions? Please step up. Yeah.
Sure. I just wanted to follow up quickly on something that you said, Vina, about eligibility criteria across these courts, and particularly the courts that require that there be some sort of nexus established between the offense that's taken place and specific military experience. I'm a former VA clinician and researcher, and it sounds comparable in some ways to what they require for establishing service connection, but that can be difficult enough to connect military experience to a mental or physical health condition, let alone to a behavior that happens. So I'm just wondering what that might look like in practice in some of these courts, how that's assessed.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you're completely right that it seems almost impossible to assess, but I think in some ways what the courts are targeting is whether the behavior is something that can be seen as violent or tied in some way to combat behavior or combat experiences. I'm not really, right, as opposed to something like stealing a bottle of Gatorade from a store, which is, you know, seems kind of separate, but in many ways a crime like theft is a product of mental health disorders and all sorts of other experiences as well. So it's really hard to figure out what the source is. And I think for that reason, a lot of the courts that we surveyed don't have that nexus requirement, or they'll say like, they'll kind of say it as though a requirement exists, but then they look past it. And I think recognizing the reality that there's no way to really make that connection.
Thank you.
I had a question here and then Dave. Go ahead.
Also, one quick point on that. Since these courts are new and the stakeholders, I mean, the people in the courts now are pretty often the stakeholders that, you know, campaign to have them started. So places that do have a nexus will, a lot of times, and this is all very anecdotal because there is kind of a lack of data, they'll really kind of strain themselves to find that nexus if they want one, because they want to have these courts and they want to treat people if they can.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Kerwin Henderson. I'm with the Justice Programs Office at AU in DC. Just to go back to the the data management issue, part of what my office does is we provide technical assistance to treatment courts, veterans treatment courts. I know we work with the San Francisco court. There is some free data management systems out there. One of them we offer is the Buffalo MIS that the Buffalo City Courts uses. Which is definitely not a solution to fix any statewide data issues. But in the short term, just in terms of your local jurisdictions collecting data and having data just organized to present, it's a solution that's out there. So if anybody is in need or would like more information on it, you can come and see me or my colleague, Kevin Stewart over here, and we can definitely see about getting that to you, and it's free. So.
Well, we're delighted you came. This is wonderful, wonderful resource. Thank you. Professor Engstrom.
Hi, I'm David Engstrom. I'm a faculty member here at the law school. And a lot of the work I do is empirical in nature. And so I guess my question comes from that place. As I listened to the excellent student presenters here, it struck me that you've spent about a year on this, maybe more, and you seem uniquely positioned then to understand the connection between the political moment, right, as these courts are getting off the ground, and the state of empirical knowledge, so what we do and don't know about these courts. So I guess my question for the panelists, maybe also from Bob, but maybe not, I hear from Bob all the time, but maybe from the student panelists then, like, let's assume away the data problem that we just heard about. We'll bracket that for now. If you weren't resource constrained in any way, what kind of a study would you commission? What do we most need to know? So maybe it's a prioritization question. Thank you.
I would start with success measures for members who get through the VTC program successfully. I think that's one of the largest gaps. Is if you talk to any VJO, they're kind of like, well, some people don't pass, but we don't talk about them. And you're not really sure why they don't pass other than they didn't want to. And that's why so much of what the VJOs observe is anecdotal. It's like, how do I know if this member is going to do well? And some will say it's like it's like any therapy where the person, you know, accepts that they need treatment and that they need help, and then from there they can go on. As opposed to what one of the VJOs here will say is like, as soon as the person says like, when can I get out, he knows they're not going to do well in the program because they're focused on moving on as opposed to getting treatment. And so I mentioned that because you have this other constraint where the VTC is a county-based organization. It's not the VA. And so even though the VA is providing all these services and the VJO is kind of the one guiding the member through the program, the VJO is a VA staff. And so the VA is not necessarily the one that's going to do all the data gathering of how well this county court is doing. So you kind of have a gap of who's really responsible for collecting this data. So I would say that would be my priority.
Yeah, adding on, some courts, it seems like they will just keep an Excel sheet and track their own recidivism measures. So maybe they'll be looking at whether someone has been arrested within the 3 years after they've completed their program. And that's important to know, of course, but I think in addition to that, we had discussed as a group that we wish we knew whether the veteran still had housing, whether they had a job, what was going on with their family, custody issues, things like that. So I would also add that as an important tracking measure.
Right, and if you cut off recidivism measures at a certain number of years, you also want to know about these other issues because those are pretty good predictors of potential recidivism in the longer run, if you will. John, how are we doing on time? Do we have time for 3 more short things?
Until 2 o'clock.
Okay.
This is an awesome conversation. We'd love to keep it going. So feel free to take another question or two. Our next event's at 2:30.
Okay, I guess we can take a couple of very short questions, and then maybe the panelists can stick around.
Just wrap it up with these 3 who are already.
Okay, if you could add 3 brief questions, sir.
Yes, my name is Bob Hollis. I'm with a group called American Institute for Cognitive Thought and also Vet to Vet. For the last 7 years, I've crossed the country talking just to veterans, and we talk about data. I'm finding that out of all the things we say, it's a lot of information. I'm finding out that it's not getting to the veterans. And I've been from Maine all the way to Florida, and I'm hearing this. But in spite of the fact that we've been going to war since before the Revolutionary War, it's very little information out in the mental health area about reintegrating veterans back into society and into their families. And it's a lot missing on that. And when I mention veteran culture, I have people talking about military culture instead of veterans culture, and it's 2 different worlds.
Thank you very much. Well, we'll take that as a useful contribution. Thank you. Sir, and then we'll have one more.
Very briefly, 2 quick points. On the issue of evaluation, very much agree with my colleague that the resources are there. We need to remember the context. We're in the middle of the largest expansion of treatment funding in history, along with electronic health records and accountability over in the Medicare system. That means if a hospital is having problems with people coming back, they lose money. A treatment agency that can't answer to a court for recidivism and other outcomes driven by good front-end screening and assessment over time will start to and should start to lose money. That accountability is on its way. But courts have to ask the question, judges that don't have scorecards to keep track of what happens when they refer somebody out. A referral without that kind of follow-up is malpractice. And courts have to understand that a sheet that keeps track of your referrals is part of the problem. Second point, the gentleman before touched on the family issue. The VJO surveys that have been done indicate that from 20 to 60% of VTC clients are parents. On an average, 2 each. On an average, about half of them are custodial parents. Some veterans will heal in their families. Some veterans' families will be affected by the disorders that they brought back from deployment. To leave those kids out who also served and not pay attention. The point is not that VTCs should provide children's services. The point is the federal government spends $400 billion a year, the federal government alone, on services to children, and VTCs and VJOs ought to be about making sure veterans' families get their fair share of the resources already in the community providing children and family services.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Thank you. Final question.
Hi, I'm Jude Litzenberger. I'm the California Veterans Legal Task Force Executive Director and a veteran myself. And I'm real concerned about evaluation, not in if or not we have recidivism out of these courts, but if or not we get quality treatment outcomes. And I don't see a whole lot of measurement going on that. I've taken the data from San Diego's VTRC pilot program, which was a 3-year program. They have their judge published an online report. It's available at cvltf.org. 3-year program, talks about who went in, who got out, who got what crimes, lots of things. And we used that, I was the coordinator of that program, we used that in order to evaluate whether or not our outreach was working, whether or not we were getting defense counsel educated, whether or not veterans were hearing about it, and we could target that. After 3 years, the court decided they had no more money and decided not to do it, so now they're going back to the traditional drug court model. Nothing wrong with that model, it just doesn't keep evaluation numbers. But we have that. During the time people went through that program, we tested 5 different standardized test measurements, self-reports for symptoms of post-traumatic stress, anger management, substance abuse, and that. That's about to be published by the PRA Associates. They're going to do a presentation. I'm going to be a part of that at the drug court conference in Anaheim in June. We're going to hopefully have that on our website soon as they get the approval. But it does say that there's some significant changes as people go through the drug court in those symptoms, and that's really for a veteran what matters. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, we've heard all kinds of interesting ideas of what the future research programs will have to look like, but thank you very much for now.